satisfy you. but I gotta go.
Thoughts knock around in my head like pinballs in my brain. It hurts back and forth, but I don't score points. Yeah, I just keep on feeling worse. The glass on my hand feels cold.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio. Welcome back to another Office Hours. Happy Monday to everybody. Hope you guys had a great weekend. We've got a really fun show in store for you guys today. We're going to dive deep into parallel processing. We're going to talk about why you would want to use it, and then kind of show you a bunch of different tricks, tips, ways to set it up, different plugins to use it on. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is a technique I'd certainly find myself using on every single mix, regardless of which. It is literally, it comes up every single time I go to mix something. So parallel processing, if you're not already using it on everything at U2, I'm sure by the end of today's show you probably will. And just a reminder, everybody, we love hearing music from you guys. Our countdowns would be nothing without music from you guys watching. So if you've got music that you want to see featured, make sure you guys hit us up live at uaudio.com. Shoot us an MP3 with a little bit about how you used the UA gear. And then, of course, later in the show, we're going to get to our studio showdown. Hashtag UA Office Hours. Post it up on Instagram, and we'll find your photos, and you will be in for a chance to win a UA Live mug. So yeah, without further ado, let me bring on the friends, Drew and Matt. How you guys doing today?
Doing good. Morning, everybody.
Yeah. Man, so we're gonna dive deep into parallel processing today. You guys, we've got our script here. Out of all of the different plugins that you use for parallel processing, and this goes for the chat as well, I want to hear from you guys out there watching. What's your favorite plugin to use as a parallel process? Drew, you got one off the top of your head?
God, yeah. God, I didn't know you were going to ask that. I guess I'd say 1176, because 1176 is super fast attack compressor. So there's, other than, the anniversary edition, which has the slow mode, but otherwise 1176s classically are super fast, and they just lend themselves really well to that because of that fact. Because you very often with parallels, as we'll talk about today, you're wanting to grab those transients. So I'd say 1176.
Nice. How about you, Matt?
Probably say distressor, because I like really, one of the things I like about using parallel processing is you can really use much more extreme settings than you'd be able to just using something as an insert. And I love just slamming the distressor, especially with the distortion modes. So
Nice.
Yeah, I think that'd be my pick.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's a good one.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, I literally do this in every mix. I think the one that has reliably been in a parallel path on my drums for almost every single, it's the DBX 160. Like that one, the way it spanks drums, and it's one of those compressors that I find myself, I never use it not in parallel, which is why I think it's a good qualifier for being my pick. I pretty much never put it directly on a track. It's always running kind of parallel with something else.
Interesting.
So yeah, we got Distressor from the chat, smashing the drums in 1176. Distressor, Studio D. Chorus parallel on vocals, high pass, or 1176 smashing drums. Nuke on the distress. Yeah, we're all drinking from the same fountain here, guys. Like, this is we're all amongst friends here. So we're gonna dive into everything there is to know about parallel compression. But before we get into all of our content today, we've been kind of trying a new thing this season on Office Hours, and that's kind of checking out some of your guys' comments on other videos over the past week or so. And you saw the trailer, you've heard the news. There's something big on the UA front, and that is, we've launched a new series of audio interfaces, Volt. And if you've somehow missed this news, you're welcome. These are USB bus powered audio interfaces that start. What's the starting price on these again? It's like $129, $139.
$139. Yeah.
$139. Like, these are incredibly awesome, affordable audio interfaces. And when you get up to the 76 models, you get not just a vintage preamp mode that kind of adds a little lift and a little bit of life to your signals, but it also has an analog 1176 style compressor built into them. So they're available for pre-order right now, and they're going to be launching in November. But there's already a few folks very special folks who got their hands on them early, and so we wanted to kind of highlight some of their videos. So Warren Hewart over on Produce Like a Pro did a great. He got 1 day, I believe it was, with the 276. So he got his butt to a studio, put a band together, recorded a song using the 276 to help show off the showcase all the new features and give his first like unvarnished opinion. Like, it was actually kind of fun watching his video because you could literally see him kind of processing it in real time and listening and kind of digesting what's going on with the sound there. And you guys had some amazing comments over there on that video. This one here from Craig. Warren, excellent example of using a low-cost equipment to produce a wonderful performance. Thanks to all. P.S. You had me at Woodsides. And if you've been keeping up with the Volts, you'll know the 76 models have got beautiful wood panels. Silvano, it's an audio interface with effing wood. All right, apparently it's all about the wood. I figured you guys would be talking about a lot more about the 76 compressor, the vintage mode, but apparently, yeah, it's got wood sides. They're incredible. JP says, sounds top notch, detailed, full body, low self noise, great performances, everything you need. Yep, exactly. And Ryan saying, this review run through is what I've been looking for. As someone who gets inspired at 11 p.m., will grab my laptop or iPad, my interface, and a mic, and just go record vocals in a random place. He's 100% right. This is exactly the interface for him. He's got the 476 in his cart from Sweetwater right now. He thinks he's going to go select checkout. I didn't see a follow-up comment to see if that actually went through, but I'm pretty certain it did. And that is one of the really rad things about these interfaces, with them being bus powered and with them being USB. I've been doing this myself with the 276 I've got downstairs, hooking up to the iPad, just recording ideas in the moment. It's really it's something. It's fun to get out of the studio every once in a while, right? And like kind of explore your house, get out of the house, go outside, go into nature. And these interfaces will go along with you. But I also want to give a shout out to another great review video from our boy Sanjay C, who you're going to be seeing a lot more of over here on the Universal Audio channel when the Volts release. And he did a whole series of tutorials. He's going to be the man walking you guys through how to get set up and started with the Volts. But he did a great review over on his channel, and there's so many comments there are too many comments to paste in here, but he did incredible demos producing his own music using the Volts. So it was really cool to see, again, the results in the pudding there. And the comment here, I feel that the vintage mode helps your voice cut through the mix very well. And this is something that, as you guys hear more and more about the Volt and you start kind of experiencing them for yourselves, the cumulative effect of recording through these processes, that's where it's at, right? Like, and I've even done this myself in testing, and I'm sure Matt and Drew, you guys have been hands-on with this as well. Like, you notice it, you take it on, you take it off, you miss it, but these aren't like, holy crap, punch you in the face sort of effects. These are very much just like, give a lift, give a little extra energy, a little bit of life to it. And then when you do that across multiple tracks, or, with, doubles, guitars, vocals, you start kind of layering it up, it just creates such a rich, amazing sound.
That's a thing, that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize about record making in general, is just, it's subtlety stacked on subtlety stacked on subtlety. All of a sudden, ain't so subtle, so it's like these processes, they are subtle, but yeah, the cumulative effect of them, as you said, Ben, is the way to go. So Warren's video, Sanjay's video, there's a Vintage King video. If you really want to hear what Volt sounds like, you can hear about it right now, even though they're not shipping for a few more weeks. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Nice. Well, great. So that's our top comments, I guess. Unless there's any other big questions coming in the chat. Oh, good question here. Before we jump off of Volt, can you use UAD plugins with the Volt interfaces? And that's a no for this one. So the Volt are, with them being USB and bus powered, they don't have DSP built into them. All the vintage mode and the 76 compressor that are built into those are actually, they're analog circuits. They're analog emulations of what those processors do. So yeah, that means they're not adding any latency, but it does mean that these are some of UA's first interfaces without DSP processing on board. And that's how we're able to, keep the costs down and make them super portable, as well as, powered over USB, in most cases. So yeah, guys, let's jump into parallel processing. And I think maybe the best place to start with parallel processing, what is parallel processing? Like, how do you explain this to someone who's maybe not familiar with parallel process? I guess if you kind of break it down, right? It's processing that happens in parallel. So that means you're kind of running two things at the same time. How would you describe it, Drew?
Yeah, so like the way I typically like to talk about parallel processing is actually if you go to my screen, Ben, you can see I've got a couple things prepared that might help us to kind of dig into this. And in order to understand parallel compression, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about, but really it applies in a lot of to any kind of parallel process, saturation, EQ, combinations thereof. So it might be good, way to understand it is to look at regular compression, like what we consider, you might have heard it referred to as downward compression. A lot of people don't use that term, but just your regular compression. And, by definition, that's occurring on the loud signals. So here we can see, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a little transfer curve that lets us see, in fact, that high level material is being turned down. So, when you look at the uncompressed waveform versus the compressed waveform, you can see that, you are in fact impacting the transients. And this is a good thing, right? Because once you apply makeup gain, which you can see here on the right-hand side, so we downwardly compress or we turn down the loud stuff, and then we add makeup gain to sort of compensate. And the net result is that, we have a density and a thickness that's added. We can shape the transients. We can shape the transients with attack and release. That's what they're all there for. But we are, in fact, touching the transients, right? So that's the concept here of touching the transients. So there might be an instance where you could say, okay, that's regular compression. That's great a lot of the time. But what if I want to leave my transients completely untouched? And this is where parallel processing comes into play. And, you could think of it, sometimes it could be referred to as upward or low level compression. And if you look at the transfer curve, the difference between these two, you can see on the upward one that we're actually taking the low level signals and actively turning them up. Now, there are plugins that do this. There are upward or low level compression plugins out there, but they haven't really caught on, simply because engineers have, over the years, and this is, parallel processing's been around for many, many, many decades. They found out that, well, you know what, rather than instead of inventing a new type of processor, I can use my regular compressors in a different configuration. So hence the parallel compression configuration, where, as you said, you leave your original signal untouched, and therefore those transients never get touched. They're never subject to gain reduction. They're never subject to that downward compression or that standard compression. And so this allows you to, in parallel, do the compression, bring it together at the end, and, Bob's your uncle, right? You have your transients untouched, and yet you have all the thickness and density of that. One thing we'll also add in today is we'll add in this notion of what you might have heard is referred to as New York style compression, which is basically parallel compression with an EQ after the compressor. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Nice. A quick and dirty explanation of it and kind of the concept behind it. I don't know if that triggered any questions. Let's see.
Again, a couple of questions, and these are some stuff that that we have here in our script to kind of run into later. Biggest question is around phase issues with parallel processing. We're definitely going to touch on that, guys, because I think probably the best way to go through this is we'll set up a few examples, we'll talk about it, and kind of show you some of the best uses for it, and then we'll talk about the issues closer to the end here, because it is something you definitely want to keep your ears open for. Like, am I doing more harm than good? And there's a lot. There'll be a nice little healthy debate going on here about this. But before we talk about issues, I want to talk about like why parallel processing is awesome. Like, why does it show up in every single mix most of us do? And I mean, first and foremost, to me, like, it's a great way, and I think, Matt, you kind of mentioned this, with your saying that you love to use in the distressor, right? Is that this kind of makes it so you can go nuts. You can, like, put it on nuke, you can overdrive, you can kind of go insane with the settings. So you can really sound design a little bit, kind of adding saturation, adding a lot of pumping, and adding stuff that, if you listen to it in solo, you'd be a little concerned. Like, and your clients might be a little afraid. They might be like, dude, are you listening to the same thing? Like, in solo, and I found this so much whenever I listen to other people's mixes, and, if you get to kind of get in there and listen to it in solo, you hear their parallel processing, and you're like, that sounds trash. And then you listen to it in context with everything else, you're like, oh, that's exactly what it needed. and because when you take it away, you're like, what happened to the life of the mix? It's that like excitement, right? That you end up getting from using insane settings.
Yeah, that's so true. And yeah, I like what you said at the start. I mean, it's really like a way to explore like the outer limits of your plugins that you don't normally get to explore when you're just using them as inserts. You can really have a lot of fun with it in the sound design realm.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, and then love to hear anybody else in the chat here. I saw someone was asking, if parallel compression can add depth to mixes. And I guess, in a way, yes, like because you can, it's not just all about distortion or pumping or compress. Like we're going to do we'll show some examples of this, but we'll also show some other kind of more creative ones where it can, you can use it to add a little bit more dimension. You can use it to add stereo width, kind of, harkening back to what we were talking about last week with all the mid-side stuff. You can do some of these tricks. And again, essentially, as Drew explained, right? Parallel processing means that you've got your dry, unaffected signal coming down one lane, one track, and you've got your affected signal on another. And it's the blending together of these two that really, that's what defines parallel compression. So,
well, yeah, and speaking to depth specifically, really when you think about acoustic sounds, in parallel, we've talked about extreme settings, right? When you compress, let's say you do your room mics or overheads or drums in general in parallel, you can do a lot more compression and therefore bring out that low level detail. So from an auditory perspective, you actually can get more. You can feel like you can go deeper into the room, right? Mm-hmm. Without having to overcompress your original signal. So when you compress those rooms and that low level material comes up, yeah, you definitely there can be some 3D, if you're dealing with acoustic elements, right? With even with overhead mics, imagine drum overheads have ambience in them, but if you're not compressing them hard enough, it's not brought out. But when you bring in a parallel version alongside it, then all of a sudden that low level material, that low level acoustic information gets brought up and it tricks the listener into thinking, oh wow, we're in a bigger room. My drum example is a good example of that, where when I bypass the parallel, it's, a lot of this sort of the front to back depth, a lot of that ambience of the drum recording goes away. So
nice.
Yeah, definitely can do that.
Well, Drew, since you mentioned it, let's maybe dive into some examples here. We could talk till we're blue in the face about how awesome it is, but let's show people some examples of this, how to set it up, and kind of some tricks to apply to their own mixes.
Yeah, so I've got a drum example set up here, and I'm going to show you kind of the old school method of using parallel or New York style compression. I'm kind of set up for both of these here, and that is that the compression is put onto sends, right? So as you can see here, I've got drums right over here. I've got a set of some live drums here, 8 or 10 tracks of them. I don't have any room mics, so I'm looking to bring out some of the ambience, as I've said. So I've got two different ones set up. I'm going to show you this one labeled Crush 2 first. I want to focus on Crush 2 because Crush 2, as you can see here, is the one that's being fed by my sends. So you'll notice here that I have post fader sends set up in Luna. So in order to do this, if you want to do this, you can click on a send and hit the plus sign and you can build it from scratch, or you can simply do, Command Shift B to bring up the create bus to create a bus from a send as opposed to an output. So you'll notice I'm not sending my drums directly to this Crush bus. I'm sending, because they're going to their regular drum subgroup, and instead I'm creating a parallel send. So that's the whole, you got to make sure you're doing it that way directly from the sends. And the reason why I like this is you'll notice right here is this gives me a lot of control when it comes to multi-tracked drums. Yeah, this is pretty critical because I may not want all of my elements to go to it. So for example, this is my overheads right here, and sometimes cymbals and compressors, don't get along so good, right? Things get kind of splatty and so forth. So, meantime, I want my kick drum and my snare drum and my toms to get that parallel processing. So that's why I prefer that. Notice no hi-hat, no ride cymbal. Don't really need, and no snare bottom, right? So this is what I love about sends, having parallel compression on a send is I'm in control of not only what goes to this parallel bus, but also how much. So that comes up over here, and you'll notice I've got several things going on here that are kind of interesting. Number one, in Luna, we have the ability to add the summing if we wanted, which is great, right? The ability to actually incorporate this summing emulation into it. We also have tape, right? Which, the Ampex 102 here works really, really well. You'll notice that I'm actually kind of going a little crazy with that one here. I'm really driving into the record head. So this is truly a parallel process that includes more than just compression. But, I just figured we'd go all out here. And then I've got an 1176, like I've mentioned in the startup, where it's my favorite. And, I like it because it's fast and so forth. So let's go ahead and listen to this. Actually, let's go ahead and let's listen to these drums by themselves first, and you'll hear. And they sound good. They sound fine. But let's see what we can do by bringing we'll bring in Crush 2. So right away, it's bringing that kick and snare forward. So with it off and on. So, and in this case, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted kick and snare to be snappier and more forward without, starting to excite too much of the sides and so forth. So that's kind of the classic drum example there, using sends so that you're in complete control. And then compression, and I happen to throw in a little bit of extra stuff here. So
It's like you got a little new summing, a little ATR tape, just a little something.
That's the beauty of Luna, is like those things are there. They're one click away, and they sound so good. Sometimes it's hard to do that.
Yeah,
But this is
So yes. So that's the send example, the classic send example. It's great for multi-tracked items because you have a lot of sources and you can pick and choose what you want to do.
Well, it is such a great way of, and then what's great about it too, right, Drew, is that you showed kind of pulling down the overheads on there, but this is one of my mix revision tricks. So you're working with a client, you send them the first mix or two, and then they're like, man, I want a little bit more snare. So like you have an option when the client asks like, hey, can I get some more snare or some more kick? You could turn up the big fader at the bottom, right? You could turn up the overall balance of it, but now maybe it's pushing to the bus compressors too hard, or maybe now it's competing with the bass in a way that you don't like. By having this crush fader up top, this is typically what I'll do whenever someone sends me that note. I can kind of start goosing that up 3, 4, 5 dB because it's going into a compressor. It's already they're kind of working against each other, but in a way that's adding more energy and more tone. And if you have, especially with like 1176, right? We talked about this when we talked about compressors. It's all about like the attack and release settings. So if you've got that compressor, so that when the kick hits, you get a lot of the snap, you get a lot of that front edge of the kick coming through, pushing another 3, 4 dB into your parallel compression. All of a sudden, boom! Now you've got the what sounds like more kick, but without it really overtaking the mix or really kind of complicating other things. So having these independent controls, and then to be able to pull the room mics out, or again automate this stuff, guys. Like this is a great way to like take I do this all the time in mixes. Verses. I'd have my static balance for the verse, and then when I get to the chorus, if I want the drums to just kind of kick a little harder to kind of like support the other guitar part coming in, instead of turning up my drum subgroup, I'll turn up the parallel track. Again, like it's this thing that in a dense mix, these parallel processes are going to be your best friends. Like
you just hit on a great point there, Ben, that like when we look at this is what I love about this method, right? With this method, look at like, here's the control, right? The locus of control for the parallel and the direct are right at my fingertips, right? And so we're going to show you some mix knob workflows that are great, and that work great for mix buses and for lead vocals and stuff. But this opens up so many possibilities. So just to illustrate what Ben was saying here's my drum crush, right? So instead of on the choruses, right, I want instead of turning up the drums, I just turn up the crush, right? So your verses are a little more tame. There's a little less of the compressed sound, and then the chorus comes in, and we're going up a little bit. We're going up a dB, but only on the crush side. So it's not like you're pushing the volume of the drums, but you're just changing the character, and it just gives you a lot more control over top of what's happening in the mix as you do elements. Otherwise, if I were doing this with a mix knob, I'd be in there automating some mix knob, which is not the same. It's not the same as of leaving the original alone and bringing in the wet, right? Bringing in the wet. There's a difference in and we'll talk about that when the time comes for that.
Nice. Well, and Drew, before we jump off of this example, can we hear what just the parallel path sounds like on its own? Again, this was a big thing that I used to be very paranoid of. Like, man, my parallel stuff sounds terrible. Am I ruining my mix? Can we hear what it sounds like, just so people at home can understand? Like, these are not supposed to sound pretty, guys. These are supposed to sound a little nasty.
I'm trying to think of what my settings are here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm all buttons in. But so here's the crush. Yeah, and that's actually, I was playing around with it this morning. That's probably a lot of this that I really went into. I really went whole hog on the ATR 102.
Mm-hmm. And,
but yeah, you're right. It's ugly. It's ugly on its own.
Guys. It's meant to be ugly. Like, this is the whole point of this stuff, is like, be aggressive, be a little nasty with it, and just let's do our homework here real quick. What's your 1176 settings? How did you get it to sound so nasty like that?
Well, first of all, legacy, right? Legacy. That's a leftover from a social media video I was doing, and I wanted to make sure I was using the legacy. But yeah, so it's the legacy plugin. So this, I'm not even relying on the Mark II versions for this. And yeah, it's all buttons mode. It's all buttons. All holding down the shift. Clicking on your ratio buttons and holding shift while doing so puts them all in, right?
Well, and so for folks, if you're not familiar with 1176s, this is like what's one of the oldest tricks in the book. So typically on a compressor, right, you only select one ratio at a time. On a normal compressor, most compressors only let you select one ratio at a time. The 1176, though, the way it was made, it actually all of those are independent buttons, and if you did it just right, if you kind of use all four of your fingers on the analog unit and shoved them all in there, it would freak out in a great way, and you'll even see like the meter pins itself.
Pins.
It reacts in a really unusual and it adds a bunch of extra gnarliness to the sound.
Yeah, it sure does.
So of course, all of our 1176 plugins emulate this. You can get to it just by, as Drew showed, just press shift and click. And I guess for attack and release, you're going slowest attack, fastest release, right? Yeah,
and slowest attack on an 1176 is still, it's 800 microseconds, so that's 0.8 milliseconds. So even though that, we typically think of parallel compression as using fast attack, that's fast attack on 1176s are always fast. No, I was like,
there's no such thing as a slow 1176.
There's no such thing, other than our anniversary edition, which has that dedicated 10 millisecond slow mode. Yep. So yeah. And then, of course, obviously driving it really hard, don't be afraid to push into it super duper hard, get where you need to get there, and then back it off on the back. So,
yeah. We got a great question here in the chat, kind of asking, if the Neve 33609 has the same qualities as the 1176.
It's a different animal.
It's a different beast, right?
Yeah.
It's just even from like a topology point of view, the 1176, this is a FET compressor that's using the characteristics of these FETs inside of the circuit. The 33609 is using a diode bridge. So what does that mean? It means that they're analyzing and compressing the signal with different technologies, different topologies. They react differently, they distort differently. And this is why, when people ask, like, why do we have so many different UAD compressors? It's because they all sound different. Why are there 5, 6 1176s? Just of that one compressor Drew just showed in the UAD collection, there's is it 5 or 6 of them in total when you count the SEs?
I guess if you count the I guess if you count SEs, God, I'd have to figure it out. I'd have to count them up in my head.
Might be 6, yeah.
Yeah, it might be 6.
But the reason why we have them all is no two of them sound the same, and especially when you're using them like how we're using them today, and you're pushing them to the edge, all that character really comes forward and becomes super apparent. So if Drew were to switch from that 1176 to another one, we'd all be like, oh yeah, now I hear the difference between a Blue Stripe and a Revision D or the Legacy. So this is one of those cases where the character of the plugins really comes in clutch.
Yeah, a couple more things to say real quick here, just so people know, in case, because maybe I'm trying to anticipate some questions that people might be thinking. Number one, does Parallel, does Parallel replace your drum bus compression? And the answer to that for me is no. They have different reasons, right? So here's my 2254 that's on the drum subgroup, which is quote unquote the dry, and we would say quote unquote uncompressed version, but really it's not. It's just getting slow attack compression, a different style of compression. So I'm still compressing the quote unquote dry uncompressed drums. And this is just all about, and I do that quite regularly. I'll still compress the original thing because they have different intents, right? That is to shape the overall like basic drum sound. And my Parallel process is doing its own thing entirely, right? The other thing I wanted to just say real quick before we move on to another workflow is there is an option, right? So there's a second option here, and that is, if you don't like is to do from the send workflow is this, you'll notice here I have a second crush. This one is the original crush here, that is getting a send off of the drum sub. So, I've got, this is a subtle difference in the sense that this one, it's a parallel process, but it's subject to this entire chain up here, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a different way of parallel compressing or parallel processing my quote unquote already finished drum sound. Whereas the sends that are coming from individual tracks are not subject to this chain, and therefore are my drums in a slightly less polished state. So I know we're splitting hairs here and getting into the weeds, but I just figured I'd point that out.
But these are important weeds to whack, right? These. And Drew, good job anticipating the questions, because we got a couple of questions that you literally just kind of addressed there of like, Cody was asking if you can send a bus to another bus. And that's kind of what Drew just set up here, is like using that full drum sub to now send to a crush. That would be a different option of doing it. Of course, as he mentioned, that send is now getting the polish that he's put on his drum sub, and the blend is controlled by the big faders on the drum track. So he doesn't have independent control over how hard the kick is going to push into that parallel compression. So there's always kind of these trade-offs of like the different ways of setting these up. And this kind of brings us a great kind of transition to one of the other most common ways of setting up parallel compression, which is using the mix knob. And you'll notice a lot of UA plugins have got mix knobs on them, which can be used to effectively create parallel compression. But yeah, Matt, do you mind kind of walking us through setting up and using parallel compression with the mix knob inside of a plugin?
Yeah, totally. So I've got also a drum bus set up here, but it's like a programmed drum pattern with only 4 tracks feeding the drum bus, so a little less complicated than what Drew has going on, and I'm not as concerned with having complete control over how each track feeds the compressor separately. So I'm just sending all 4 tracks to a group, and I'm compressing that group. And I have 2 different things going on here. I'll pull them both up here. So I have the Ocean Way, which I'm feeding into the Fairchild, which I'm using kind of as a parallel compressor with the mix knob turned down. So let me start with the compression here so you can hear what I'm doing. Let me slow up the drum group. So I'm basically slamming the Fairchild pretty much as hard as I can. I have the headroom knob turned up, or the headroom screw turned up. Then I have the input gain just cranked. So that's pretty much, I'm driving into the Fairchild as hard as it'll let me. And I want to get a little bit of breakup, is the reason I'm doing that. So if you hear with the mix is at 100%, the kick is like there's a point to it. It's clipping a little bit, which is what I like. So here's like the extreme example. So right there, you can hear a little bit of clipping. And the snare is just really getting compressed. I have the sidechain filter in, so the kicks, it's not reacting as much to the kick, but when the snare hits, it's hitting like 10 dB of compression or even higher. So it's definitely given like the tone I want. I'm getting a little bit of that point, those harmonics on the kick, but it's a little bit too much. It sounds too much compressed. So I'm going to back off the mix knob here, and I'll just do it in real time so you can hear. So now I'm getting into an area where it's like I'm still getting some of the benefits of driving the Fairchild that hard, where I'm still getting a little bit of harmonics on the kick. I'm still getting a little level control on the snare, but it's much tamer. It doesn't actually sound like it's being compressed 10 to 20 dB. Mm-hmm. And the other part of what I'm doing here is another parallel trick that's pretty specific to Ableton, but you could do it in another DAW as well. So I have a Ocean Way here in remic mode, and you notice when you put it in remic mode, the dry or the wet solo is locked. You can't turn it off, so it's always 100% wet. So I want to use the Ocean Way in remic mode, but I want a dry wet balance. So I'm using what's called an audio effect rack in Ableton, which basically lets you create multiple chains here, and then you can process each chain separately. So I have a dry chain, which is just 0 dB. It's just passing through the drum signal with no processing. And then I have a wet chain, which is going through the Ocean Way remic mode. And then I have that tucked down underneath. So it's effectively giving me a dry wet, mix on a plugin that doesn't have a mix knob or doesn't use the mix knob with these particular settings. So that lets me drive. The advantage of doing this as opposed to putting the Ocean Way on a send and using it that way, I can basically use the Ocean Way in parallel, blend that together, and then go into the Fairchild. So I'm driving the Fairchild with this already mixed Ocean Way sound. So let me turn off the Ocean Way, and you'll hear how dry it sounds. It totally sounds like a programmed drum beat now. It doesn't sound like those sounds are in the same room. It sounds like they're coming from different places.
Yeah.
Then I turn on the Ocean Way, and all of a sudden they're all kind of in the same space now. Even though it's a programmed drum beat, it kind of tricks you into thinking that it's almost recorded in the same space, or at least played back in the same space. And then driving in the Fairchild with that, it just kind of enhances it. So let's put the Fairchild back on. And then off. So it's kind of taking the room sound, bringing it in the same space as all the other sounds, and just what I end up with is something much more pleasing to listen to. It doesn't sound like a programmed drum beat. It sounds like just a nice loop, So yeah, that's kind of how I would use drum bus compression with the mix knob as opposed to the parallel that Drew showed.
Nice. And yeah, so got a question here in the chat. Jay's asking, so is parallel compression the same as this? In theory, right? It is, because that mix knob is now letting you blend the dry signal and the wet signal together. So you're getting a little bit of both. You're getting both in a parallel fashion. But you guys will notice it's slightly different, right? It's and this is a point Drew and I we've had heated discussions about this in the past as well, of like, it's not quite the same because you're going to be attenuating the dry signal or the wet signal as you blend between those two, right? Like the mix knob at 50/50 is not 100% of this and 100% of that. It's actually like it's like down 3 or 5 dB of both in the middle. So it tries to compensate it so the overall gain feels about the same. Otherwise, you bring up to 50/50 and your levels would be through the roof.
Yeah.
So this is like the advantage of using the mix knob, and also the disadvantage of using the mix knob is it's going to be a smoother transition between compressed and uncompressed. But you kind of miss out on the thing we were talking about with Drew's example, right? Of being able to use this as like an upward compressor, something that's bringing up and adding compressed energy underneath your full transient signal.
Yeah, it's really kind of based on what you're doing too. When you think about it, like in my example, I have multiple drums. I have 10, 12 drum tracks feeding this crush bus, but like to try and do that on an entire mix is really, really difficult and unmanaged, not easily managed. So like for me, the mix knob is awesome for things like mix bus. I use it on mix bus all the time. And it's great on instances where you want to get it dialed in and you're going to leave it alone, because the other thing is that mix knob is buried in a GUI and not out on the faders where you can sort of work them. So they both have their place, but yeah, it's definitely, make sure you understand that distinction, because as you change the mix knob, you are generally, in most cases, you're manipulating the dry signal as well, which means as you go more towards the wet, you could actually be reducing the volume of something in a mix. So just be careful and keep your ears on all that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is why it's good to know both of these methods. And again, guys, I really hope you guys are taking all this in. We're throwing a lot at you all at once, but the idea here is that you're kind of filing all these ideas and tips away in the back of your head, so that way next time you're working on, say, some drums or on a mix with guitars, because like so far we're showing a lot of drum examples because it's the most fun one to hear this stuff on, but don't get it twisted. Like this stuff works great on guitars. Vocals, man. I use parallel processing on vocals almost all the time. This is a great way, and I remember one of the videos that made the biggest impact on me. I saw think it was like a Mix with the Masters video talking about Adele's vocals, and he pulled up the parallel process that he was using for Adele's vocal. It was the all buttons and 1176 going nuts, like tucked in underneath it. So like he had this beautiful dynamic vocal, but underneath it, and especially again automating it for the choruses, bringing up this high energy, super tight, compressed, gritty version of that vocal. That's what gave the vocal the texture that makes it just jump out of the speakers. So these tricks are applicable to any type of instrument. And we'll talk a little bit about this, as we get to kind of some of the issues to keep in mind as you're using parallel compression. This is one of the ones that we're going to address all the phase stuff and give you guys some tips around there. But, one of the other things is the picking and choosing of how you apply parallel processing is also very important. But no, we've had a lot of questions kind of going in here asking about EQ, and Drew, you mentioned that with the New York style compression, it's compression, it's parallel, not just parallel compression, but it's also specifically adding a bit of a what is it, like a kind of like a smiley face, kind of a big like a top and a bottom boost on top of that.
Yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want with it, but yeah, the traditional method is to sort of pump up the bottom and pump up the top. Something that if you done it directly on the direct source, might have taken things a little bit over the top, but because it's in parallel and it's on its own fader, you can kind of bring it in. It's kind of like a blend of compression and EQ. We're getting into the territory of like what exciters do and saturators and that kind of thing. So it's like ear candy in addition. So in my case, in this case, it might be something like this, right? Where I've got my 1176 on this bus and I'm going to follow it with a Pultec. And it's the combination of these two guys together that really, not only am I getting the compression and the extra ambience and the excitement from that, but I'm doing a hyped up version of that. And this is something, just feel free to play around with it, because not only now I'm using a Mark II Pultec. So now I'm doing EQ, but I'm also doing tube saturation, and I'm doing all of the, the beautiful color that the Pultecs have in and of themselves. So this now has really stepped up into true, like sort of parallel processing, not just compression, not just whatever. So this is an example of it. Another example that would fall into this category might be, this is nice to do on drum overheads, right? You've got drum overheads or you've got room mics. And if you just brighten them with a static EQ, it's a bit, you're like, it's a little too much. But by having a parallel, New York style sort of parallel compression followed by EQ and having it be on a fader, well, now I can ride that, with automation. And now the EQ is being subject to a compressed version of my drum. So it's not going to be quite as spiky. It'll be a little bit more of a sheen type vibe, as opposed to being a more aggressive, static EQ change that I do on the original.
Nice. Well, can we hear what this sounds like with and without the EQ on your parallel?
Yeah. So let's see. Let me switch over to this guy. So let's see. Here we go. And I'll bring in. So here's the whole mix with this crush in place. So now, I guess
that's with the EQ turned on.
Yeah, that's with the EQ turned on. So let me do a pass where I'll turn it off halfway through. So pretty subtle. I'm not driving the top end too much. Let me just drive a little bit more top end. We'll do that again. So we'll start with it on. And super subtle in this case. This is already pretty. This guy's, crushing that hat. I don't know. I don't know that I want much more top end. It's already pretty. It's already pretty out there. But let's say that's what you were going for. Let's say you were trying to get that even a little bit more.
Well, Well,
so there you go. You know, like,
and this is again a great instance of like, you know, the way I'm sure you guys heard the hi-hats coming up, but also the top of the snare started to crack through a little bit harder. But again, this
the
is
point of the kick. Yeah.
and this is one of those cases. So the one Drew just showed us there, he was feeding from the drum sub into that. So the whole drum mix was established and polished off already on his sub, and then going into there. So you guys just heard one of the little pitfalls of like working this method as opposed to the dedicated faders is. And this is why a lot of times when I'm doing an extreme thing like that, right, Drew? Like I would using the sends from the faders, you could say, you know what, no overheads, or you know, definitely no hi-hat mic. But this is where like I would be like, a lot of times my parallel drum buses end up being kick, snare, toms. And probably not even like you know, I'll take the kick out mic out of it. I'll take the snare bottom out of it. I'll take anything that isn't the kind of the thicker character that I'm looking for, or the really direct, like in your face character. I'll just turn those faders down because that's not the extra energy or the vibe that I want to add into the mix. So again, feeding these from faders, this is a great example of why it's so important to set up your parallel processing in a way that allows you to achieve the sounds and the sculpting that you're going for.
Yeah, let me hear that. Let's run that one real quick. Here's the other one. I switched back over to my sends, pulled out all the overheads, and so now we're just like kicking snare. So still got some hi-hat bleed, but yeah, still getting a little hi-hat bleed from it, but I'm definitely given more control by doing it that way. You know, having that. But yeah, this guy's he's pounding that hi-hat. So there's a limit, right? That's a good lesson there too. There's a limit to everything, you know.
Totally. And this is where I start pulling out the sound replacer.
Yep. You could always be running samples in parallel that are going to this crush bus to get excitement, but just barely tucked in there, and therefore you still keep your natural stuff. You know, I do similar stuff like that with ambience here. You know, running a snare ambience alongside the dry signals.
Yeah. I got a good question here from Charlie asking about like when you're recording vocals, do people use compression on the way in, and using it to get better control of the dynamics when recording, but not sure if it's a common practice. Yeah, Charlie, absolutely, man. And this is the great way that Apollo and UAD stuff is all set up is that you can actually kind of have the best of both worlds. So, the one thing I will say about recording with compression is if you're using an analog compressor or if you have your UAD set to record mode, you're committing to that, right? So like you want to make sure you really have good monitoring. You want to make sure that you're listening and recording a signal that you love how it sounds on the way in, because you're signing up to say like, this is my vocal sound. And of course you can always do more later, but this is kind of the advice I always give to people is like, just do a touch, really listen. And I think you're nailing it already in your second comment there of like, have a reason to have it. Like, oh, the vocalist, like she's got one loud note on the chorus. I just kind of want to hold that in and then, kind of leave the rest of it a little bit more, I'll leave the compression for that for later. So a lot of people would do this with like a LA2A on the way in, right? So control the big moments, control the big peaks, have it just move on those, but then, most of the time don't make it work too hard because you can always go back and add more later. But like I mentioned, you can also put your Apollo into monitor mode, which means that you can listen to compression. You can crank it. You can go, I know a lot of guys, we've got a tutorial where we're recording hip hop vocals with the Twin X. They would kind of go nuts with all that stuff, but they would put it in monitor mode. So that way the vocalist is hearing themselves in their headphones with tons of energy and compression and excitement. But what got laid into Logic in their project file was just the clean vocal so that they could then do the processing later and tweak it to their heart's content. So you're getting the best of both worlds. And there's a lot of us who love to commit. And there's also a lot of instances where even us who like to commit will not commit because we know we're going to want to tweak that stuff later and or give the vocalist something a little bit different and special. I think jumping back into parallel here, we've just got a few more examples we want to show you, and I signed up for these ones because we're gonna get weird. This is the point in the show where we're gonna get a little. I'm gonna show you a few cool kind of creative uses for parallel processing. And you'll notice, again, these are not too dissimilar from some of the stuff we were talking about last week with mid-side, because the first one I want to show you is, kind of running in parallel the H910. And I think, Matt, you were showing us this one last week for some of your examples when we were talking about adding stereo width. So, I think some of the ways you were showing it, you were like inserting on the track, splitting the track. And of course, technically this is now a parallel process because I'm using a send from my, I've got a mono keyboard track down here, and I'm sending into the H910, and then I've pulled up a stereo chorus preset on that. This is kind of the easiest way to quickly add some character, some stereo width to a sound. So let me show you what this sounds like. I'll start without, and then I'll add it in. If you had headphones on, you heard it immediately. We go from mono, stereo. And so, again, we're talking about why is this a parallel process? Because I'm still running the dry signal. I'm still got that thing in the middle, but now I've got the H910 doing my sides. And since these are on two different faders, again, guys, as you're working on your mixes, this is a great thing to automate. This is something to maybe like the verse. Maybe you pull this down. Knowing me, I never like to pull things out all the way. I like to leave a touch of it in there, and then say you get to the chorus. And for loop-based music, guys, this is a great way to help differentiate your verses, choruses, your bridges. So you can use that to delineate a section. You could automate a rise on that to be your transition. Imagine you just kind of increase this up into the chorus. All of a sudden, you've captured people's attention. You've kind of you said, hey, listen, there's something weird just happened, and then now you're into your chorus or into a drop or something like that. So having these separated on two different faders, because you can come in here and you can keep on tweak. You could use the mix knob like we mentioned earlier, but for automation purposes, for building and kind of adding to the energy of the mix, highly recommend building this with your track and a fader next to it. But a couple other ways to use parallel processing. I've got a drum loop here. Good old fashioned breakbeat. So again, if I'm doing something like this, working with a loop, as Drew showed, kind of setting up the sends, or like Matt showed, putting a compressor plug in and using the mix knob. Those are fine. Those are good. They're great ways to do it. But when I've already got a drum loop, especially a breakbeat, something like this, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just duplicate the whole track. And so now this track that's my dry, that's the unaffected one. And then my duplicate track here, this is where we're going to have some fun. This is where we can start kind of throwing some stuff at it. And one of my favorite ones to do with this is throw the culture vulture on there. Get really rude with some distortion. Let's see what this sounds like. Sounds pretty disgusting. I think it's going to be perfect. So let me bring it. What I'll do is I'll bring in the dry one, and then a lot of times, guys, it's kind of how I approach it. I listen to it as is, just like we did, and then I'll bring back in the dry one at the volume that I had going. Because if you're building a static mix, if you're working towards a blend in your mix, what you're going to want to do is you've probably already established a decent level for how this drum and the keyboard fit together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that parallel track and I'm just going to tuck it up in there until it feels good. And that's the method. So let's try that out. There we go. Now we got some character. You heard the kick shape changed, and we're treading on the territory of, hey, remember we were going to talk about phase issue, guys? Yep, we're heading there because I'm currently creating some, and it's not on purpose. It's kind of mainly on purpose. So another one I like to do, especially again in the context of a drum loop or a breakbeat thing, man, the Transient Designer. Don't ever sleep on this guy because it will do some really cool stuff for drums, especially something like this. I picked this loop a little bit because it's a little softer. It doesn't have a crazy punchy kick or snare yet. So what we can do is, you notice I just dragged these two around. So I made the Transient Designer ahead of the Vulture. Because what I want to do is I'm going to use the Transient Designer to exaggerate the start of all the transients of this drum loop. And then those are going to push into the distortion and overdrive that even more. So let's play around with this, see how it sounds. I'll put it back in solo so we can hear what we're doing. So notice, when I added more attack at the first moment, it did a little something, but it was really when I took the sustain away. I hope you guys heard that as well as I did, because it just all of a sudden, now we're just focusing on the kick, snare, and a hi-hat, the little short transient moments of it, and then it's pushing into that distortion. Yet again, let's hear what this sounds like in context. I don't know about you guys, but I love how that now complements it, right? Like, I'm still getting the character of the original loop. The hi-hat of it is kind of staying put where it is, but I'm now kind of controlling the kick and the snare and adding more energy and vibe to those, bringing that up just enough into there. And, if I'm being honest, I'd probably kind of maybe back off a little bit more of the Vulture, maybe bring in just a little bit more of the Transient Designer. And there's no rules here, guys. We can do a parallel of a parallel, because the Vulture, it's got a mix knob here in the middle. So like we were demonstrating earlier, this is technically now a parallel process. So I'm going to let through some of the signal that the Transient Designer is adding attack, taking away sustain. I'm going to use some of the Vulture distortion, but now I'm also going to get some of the loop with just the Transient Designer on it as well. So here, I'll work that mix knob back until I actually feel good about how it sounds. There we go. That's feeling good now. So now with that mix knob back, what I'm hearing is I'm hearing the edge of the kick and the snare kind of coming through. I'm getting a little bit of the high end back to it. But when I took the Vulture out, it was way too much, right? Like this is an extreme crazy setting on the Transient Designer. That's, sounds very clicky and it's too transient rich. So Transient Designer into the Vulture, add some transients, take some transients away. Both of them are just totally changing the character of this drum loop. And we go from, kind of nice and normal to something that's much more fun and interesting to listen to, if you ask me.
Yeah, and the really cool way about you set this up with the duplicate tracks is you could then send those in the same bus and compress them together, or send them the same reverb together. I mean, they're now like their own sound that you can then send somewhere else to be processed. Yeah, that's really cool.
Absolutely. Dude, great idea, Matt. Like, yeah, I do this all the time. Like, even on a real live drum mix, right? I'll take the parallel path, use that to feed the room reverb, or use that to kind of trigger my reverb effects, as opposed to the dry signal, the dry drums, or the drum sub.
Totally.
So, yeah, guys. The way that you can stack all these things up, this is where you get a lot of fun. Yeah, and I heard you guys were hearing the little kick drum flam when it looped back around. I heard it too. It's just I didn't quite line them up perfectly. My bad. Yeah. But you guys can hear though in there. We said we're gonna get to some of the issues here, and obviously one of them, number one, in my book, is too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? This is as an engineer, this can be the most fun type of processing that you do. It's easy to overdo it and just build your mix with nothing but dense parallel processing all over it.
Yeah.
And it can get too heavy, it can get too thick, it can sound too compressed. So number one recommendation I always make for this is to kind of pick and choose where you use this, and obviously drums come up a lot. We talked about like a lead vocal, the most important elements of your mix. Those are usually the ones that you're going to want to use parallel processing tricks to add the energy to. So for me, it's always kick, snare, bass, lead vocals, and whatever, maybe like the big guitar moment or something like that. Like, pick and choose your battles here. Like, if you just throw your entire mix into a parallel process all the time, you're kind of defeating the purpose of it. You're kind of fighting against yourself at that point.
Yeah. And for me personally, I find that like when you're doing really extreme settings like what you just showed, I almost have to like step away for a half an hour, then come back and come to my senses and be like, okay, this is a little bit too much. Let me rein it in a little bit,
Yep, totally. How about you, Drew? What are some of the issues that you run into when you're using parallel processing?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a similar thing. Like, I would think you could just replace everything, like replace parallel compression with reverb. Is there too much reverb? Can there be too much reverb? Yeah, there can be too much reverb. So like, yeah, just always ask yourself that self-editing question. One of the ways I love that we've done mostly full parallel stuff on faders, because like that's like, to me, sort of the more old school way. And like what's really cool about that is the ability to just sort of like mute that parallel process entirely, because then you can really feel what it's contributing, what it's not contributing. That's harder to do with the mix knobs. So yeah, I would just say, and it doesn't need to be everything, like you said. I sometimes I don't want everybody to go home and like, or go back to their studios and do, parallel on the kick, parallel on the snare, parallel on the bass, parallel on the guitars, just like, pick and choose those things.
The individual you're right. Well, it's funny, man.
Yeah.
Like I've seen, I know Fab for a while had his template. He had set up kind of like a parallel kick and a parallel, like he had a few of them, but again, he kind of kept it to the really important elements, but also it was part of his template. So it was something, and this is, we've talked about templates a lot of times here.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you're setting up a template, you're kind of giving yourself all the options, but you'll find
you don't have to use them.
You don't always use them, right? Like,
Yeah.
or you end up, and I'm with you, Drew. Like, I'm a big fan of kind of combining elements, and when I'm using, especially when I'm doing my analog summing setups, I'll kind of run one chain of stuff in the middle. It's just it's going through an 11. It's a lot like what we showed here. A Neve EQ and an 1176 compressor that's getting kick, snare, bass, and maybe a little bit of the lead vocal. And they're all, so the reason why I combine drums, bass, and vocals into one parallel and then treat it really badly is that I want the kick and the snare, I want them to hit the vocal a little bit. I want the bass and I want these things to compete and add dirt and add energy to each other.
It's like a unified center image. Yeah, it's like a unified.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then and I put it right in mono, right down the middle. So rather, there's no width issues. It's just this kind of center channel, this chunky like thing down the middle of my mix that is just filled with the most important elements of it. And then again, I just blend it up into the mix until it feels like it's got the energy I want. Big thing to keep an ear out for those guys. Like if you were to do something like what I just described, where you're throwing the vocal into there, guess what happens when the drums take a break for a bar? All of a sudden, you could potentially have a lot of really ugly, nasty vocal getting like over compressing itself, and you have this moment where like, dude, what happened to the vocal sound in the first two bars of the verse? Oh yeah, wait a second, it's like I'm overdriving the crap out of it into my compressor. Let me go in there and automate, so I go in there and automate it down or out for that moment. Like, there's always these workarounds, but it is something you got to keep an ear out for, of like when these things take breaks, you can get these crazy pumping moments, or you can get this like, oh crap, why did the bass just jump up 6 dB? Oh, it's because the drums aren't hitting the compressor anymore. There we go. Yeah, like, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. Like, that'll happen to me every once in a while. But I know, you guys wanted to hear about phase issues. because it can be a thing, right? Like this is, especially once you start introducing EQ, saturation, harmonic processes, like the H910 or even tape, right? Like a lot of these processes are doing some form, an EQ is a phase shift, guys. Like that, when you're EQing a signal, you're using phase shift to create that EQ bump. That is, it's kind of the physics of how these things work. So it is something to really keep an ear out for. Personally, the way I like to treat it is I kind of do whatever I feel like doing, but I keep an ear out for like, is something getting canceled out? Is as I bring up that parallel, you guys probably even heard this a little bit with the Culture Vulture when I brought it up, right? You heard the shape of the hi-hat kind of change a little bit. Like it almost sounded like I was getting less hi-hat while I was getting more level. You may hear these cancellations, you may hear swirling, you may hear like a little, especially if the plugin's got a little bit of modulation to it, you may kind of hear this phase thing kind of come in and out. So the tip I always tell people is like, man, keep an ear out for it, and if you don't like it, then figure out what's causing it and find a different solution to the issue. But other than that, I personally don't get too precious about like, by doing the New York style thing like Drew showed. Yeah, you're creating some phase shifts, but that's kind of the point, because that's what's helping bring out the high end there and changing the low end character. So
yeah, and you're reacting to it in the moment. In that moment, you're reacting to it and you're compensating, and that ultimately all that matters is that is it better with it on or with it off? Because even if it is comb filtering a little or whatever, I mean, as long as it's not moving around and swishing, and obviously bad artifacts don't go there, right? Or figure out what's going on. But static comb filter or whatever, like these things are coming together, and yeah, like Ben, you were reacting to it in the moment, and and sometimes it might just be like, oh well, I'll do a little extra EQ to kind of compensate a little bit for that comb filtering, but ultimately the net gain is what I want, and that's all that really matters in the end.
Yep. It adds character. It builds character, guys. Like it's not. These things, they're not perfect. They are not. If you're going for perfect, precise, you're gonna want to stay away from some of the more extreme parallel processes. You may want to stick with like a very clean compressor. But another thing to really keep in mind too, guys, is this changes a little bit from DAW to DAW how they handle delay compensation. So you want to really make sure that whatever DAW you're using has sample accurate delay compensation happening in it. I know, I showed my examples in Luna. I've learned over the last year and a half, it's got incredible delay compensation for doing parallel processes like this. I know Pro Tools does as well.
I'm impressed. Everything I throw at it, it seems to do just fine.
Totally. Yeah. Pro Tools. I mean, all modern DAWs have some form of plug-in delay compensation. So make sure it's enabled. I know I've received more than a handful of Pro Tools sessions from folks, and they for whatever reason they had delay compensation turned off on their session. Yeah, you're gonna run into a lot of issues if your delay comp is not working. So keep an ear out for that. Like if you're running into some really weird issues, like lots of flamming and weird stuff like that, yeah, check out. You might have an issue there. And I don't know, Matt, in Ableton, is there anything that special that people have to do for parallel processing and delay compensation?
No, just make sure that delay compensation is turned on. There's also a setting called reduce latency when monitoring, where it'll bypass delay comp on record arm tracks. That's this one right here. So yeah, if you're sending from like a record arm track to a bus and you have that enabled, things will get wonky because the track you're sending from won't be delay compensated. But as long as that's off and delay compensation's on, you're good to go. Everything stays time aligned.
Nice. Yeah. So moral of the story: use your ears. But jokes aside, it is like, pay attention to what's going on. Always keep listening. Make sure, Matt, I loved your tip of like walk away for a little bit, come back to it, listen to it fresh, and always this is the art of mixing is just balance, guys. It is balancing these different sounds, these different signals, these different processes, and deriving it towards a vision that makes you excited to listen to the song. Because if you're getting excited listening to it, odds are the listeners are going to feel the same way. So that's kind of the whole point of all these tricks is to give you guys some tools in the tool belt to be able to pull out and be like, what do these drums need? Like, do I need to like I've plenty of times I've had drummers be like, oh, let me replay the part with more energy. You're like, hold on a second, sir. Let me try something real quick, because maybe I can give you that energy that you need. If the performance is already what you like, there's a lot of things that we can do as mixers and producers to add that energy in. So that's parallel processing, guys. I think we touched on a lot of these. Were there any questions popping up in the chat that we left unchecked?
Someone was asking about sending to 4 different submixes and then sending that to your stereo track, and I think we actually have that on our list to talk about the Browerizing kind of technique. But
yeah,
that is a great trick. We don't have hours to dissect and translate all of it, but if you guys are not familiar, check out Michael Brower's Browerizing methods. There's some great articles and breakdowns about how he sets it up, but it's essentially that, right? It's like multiple parallel buses working together, again, to feed energy into the mix. Another famous example, right, is the Andrew Shepp's rear bus, which is a dedicated 1176 trick that I think it was with Pultex too, right? Wasn't it like a Pultec cut 1176 and then a Pultec boost after it? So yeah, you guys, there's plenty of resources out there on the internet. Look up Andrew Shepp's rear bus, Michael Brower Browerize. Those are some very, very famous uses of parallel processing. So yeah, now that we're kind of through all the parallel process, I know all of you guys have been waiting for the Studio Showdown. This is clearly what everyone has been waiting for. Me as well, me included. I'm super excited. So if you guys aren't already aware, we're continuing to try some fun new things out this season. One of them is Studio Showdown, where we go onto Instagram and we find your guys' photos with hashtag UA Office Hours, and we put them head to head. This is and the winner gets a UA Live mug. So if you've got a dope studio, if you got UA gear, take a picture of it, post it, use the hashtag. We will find it, and we will feature it here on the show for a chance. And we're gonna give you, we'll give you our feedback, and I also want to hear the feedback here from the from the crowd. So we've got 2. These are similar but different. We got very different. I think a little bit more digital, a little more analog. But let's go one at a time here and kind of break them down and see what we're working with. So we got Mana Berry IO. Trust me, there's room for a mug. Hashtag UA Office Hours. Good to know. Good to know there is already room for the mug. When I pulled this one up, I was suspicious at first. I was like, where is what UA what? We got down here in the rack.
Oh wow, look at that.
There it is.
I mean, it's the advantage of having a rack,
the
right?
Diamond.
You can kind of you don't have to. It doesn't have to be front and center in your guys' rigs. We love all rigs, even if the UA piece of it's here, at your feet. But Matt, can you tell which one that is? Is that, I guess it's one of the X series, either
definitely an X.
It's an 8 or a 6 or an 8P potentially.
It's not a 16, I can tell you that much.
Not an X16.
Yeah, it looks like it's got high Z inputs on it, so it's one of the other 3.
Nice. 3 I mean, there's actually more than 3 monitors on here, isn't there? So like we got main display flanked by 2 other displays, the TC meter, which
nice.
I'm also a big fan of. We got, I think this is an iPad, mechanical keyboard, the Nano control, the NI controller, another controller with a desktop. Which one is that? That's the, it's hard to tell.
Can't make it out. Yeah.
Some sort of desktop synth. You can tell they're doing a lot of Zoom calls, so they've got vocal demos, so they've got the boom arm over there. Looks like the same boom arm I've got. We got
Focal twins, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great.
Man after my own heart. The big artist mic, the 16 channel, right? This one?
Yeah.
It's a great.
Yeah, S3, yeah.
Got a little stereo pair. It's a nice little setup. Nice look.
The table makes me a little nervous though.
It's pretty crowded, right? It's a lot. It's a lot
of
stuff.
Look at those legs. I'm not.
Yeah.
They're those like A-frame legs. I hope that's. Sometimes they do that and the top is just rested on there. So like, hopefully we got some screws there.
Yeah, that might be an IKEA desk.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering. Hopefully we're not at the weight limit.
Yeah, I'm curious what in the middle. It looks like.
Yeah, what is that? I was going to ask
another
you that.
display, or is that like I wonder if it's like a touch screen or a tablet display.
I was going to say it looks like some sort of macro. It looks like some sort of macro thing or something.
You got screen real estate for days. We got the the Studer 800 UAD plugin pulled up in the middle for scale, so that way you get a sense of how many pixels we're pushing here. That's a legit setup.
Speakers behind all those monitors.
But they're up over.
Yeah.
So they're not getting blocked. It doesn't. I mean, at least from this angle, it doesn't look like they're getting blocked too badly.
You might be using a little too much of your eye brain, right? You know what I mean? A little too much of the eye brain. Maybe dial that back. The worst thing engineers could ever say is that doesn't look right. You know what I mean? Like you never want to say, oh, that doesn't look right. But other than that, cool setup.
Cool great setup. So I'm gonna give this. This is a solid 6 for me.
Wow. Okay.
How about you, Drew?
Well, gosh, if you're normally higher than me, I'm gonna go 5 then because I think I'm gonna go 5 because I think they're looking at too much stuff.
All right.
Not using their ears enough.
Everybody
I'm just speculating. I'm speculating.
Yeah. And make sure, chat, you guys all have a vote in this as well. So if you register your 1 through 10, what you guys think of this setup. Matt, how about you?
I'll go 7. Just because the screen real estate alone, that's a desk I would like to sit at. Maybe without some of the keyboards on there, but other than that, killer setup.
Nice. That's a good one. So we got, I'm seeing an 8. Waiting for the chat delay to kick in here. While we're waiting for Gert's asking, are the mugs for sale? No, these mugs are not for sale. Literally, the only way that you can get one of these UA Live mugs is by submitting a photo. Even more of a reason to participate. I spotted a plant hiding in the back. 9 out of 10. Nice, very good.
All right, here they come. Here they come.
6, 4, 7, 5, 6, 5, 5, 5.5. 6, honestly 6, 5. Yeah, so Paul's 9 was a joke. I get it. All right. Speakers should be as dope as the monitor setup. This is I think Victor might nail it on the head. I think the chat's giving this a 5.5.
Yeah, seems
remember, you can't do fractions, Ben. That breaks your spreadsheet, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, doesn't it? All right, cool.
Check. Remember?
No, I didn't remember, but you did. So I'm gonna round it up. We're rounding up. We're kind here. So for a total of 24. All right, let's look at our second spot. We got Cubital, Smooth Maneuver, New York City, Audio Restoration, Mix and Mastering, Studio Remote Sessions. And James is like, holy Toledo, is that all set up in your apartment? This is really cool rig. We got a lot of analog gear. And I think that is a rack case with Tolex. I just noticed that. We got like a 500 series with a patch bay, but covered in Tolex, which is that's some Tweed Deluxe vibes right there.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely.
All right, let's check out the Apollo. So you've got an X8, it looks like, in the rack. We got an X4 up here on the desk, a satellite. Let's see, we've got some dangerous gear. It's my man. We got a knockoff Bluey.
I was gonna say, if that was a real Reve, this would have been game over.
Yeah, exactly. It was 10 out of 10. We got the Summit, the TLA 1000, and then to the right, SSL
pedals,
bus compressor, some Great River EQ, pedal drawer. We got can't forget the Manly core. It's a Manly core, right? That's their it's kind of the evolution of the Vox box, right? I think it's got.
I'm not sure.
Matt, I know you saw these.
Oh yeah, of course. The other guy was using them too. But.
Okay. We got the Dangerous Source up top. It's I can't say it's the cleanest setup of all. And we're talking about monitoring. I think this probably is an apartment setup, judging by like the headphone. Prioritizing headphone mixing over speakers, perhaps.
Like what are we looking? Yeah, is this the front of the rig? Is this off to the side? I guess we don't really know, do we?
We don't. I mean, I'm guessing since the keyboard and mouse are here, that this is where they sit.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this room is pretty small, and this is as far back as they could get to take a picture of it.
Yeah. No, but it is it's a lot of gear. It's probably a lot of heat, which is great for the winter time that we're coming up into. This is a really cool combo of stuff after my own heart. We got of course, make sure always have compressed air handy, guys. Studios hate
no
dust.
CD spindle in this one though.
No CD spindle this week. You're right. No, this is a cool set. There's a classic old Mac monitor over here. Like, I wonder, is that another keyboard? I wonder if there's like a dual rig setup going on here potentially. Yeah, this is a super rad setup. So everybody in the chat, you guys start giving me your numbers while we give it ours. Man, to me this is 2 ticks better than the first one, so I'm gonna give that one an 8. Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna go 8 as well. I mean, it could have been a 9 if the monitoring sitch we had got a better glimpse of that, and of course a 10 out of 10 if that were a real Rev A. But I'll go 8. I'll go 8.
Nice. How about you, Matt?
Guess we're all 8s this week. I'm gonna go 8 too.
Straight 8s.
If it had the monitors, the displays, and the monitors of the other setup, I'd go 10. But got to give it an 8 for the gear for sure.
All right, chat. The scores are tied at 24. So as long as you guys don't give this a 0, we will have our winner. We got a 9, a 7, an 8, an 8, an 8. I'm gonna let a couple more 8s come in before I give it the 8 because I believe this one is earning itself straight 8s across the board. Feel me saying 8 for the gear, 5 for the setup.
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yep.
I can understand.
7, 8. The previous setup looked like it had better monitors and acoustic treatment, so he's going to go lower the 4. You're not wrong, sir, but gear. 8, 7, 8, 8. All right, I'm calling it, guys. That this is our straight 8s. 32. Yeah. We got our winner.
Yeah, we do.
Congrats.
Cubital, man. Congratulations. Hit us up, social at uaudio.com to claim your prize. We'll get your address. We'll get you all sorted. And yeah, any winners for the Studio Showdown, just reach out to us, social at uaudio.com, and that's how we'll coordinate to get you guys the mugs. Well, guys, yet another office hours in the books. These have been super fun geeking out with everybody, especially Matt and Drew. Great examples, and it was really fun kind of talking through the parallel process, traditional ways, using the newer mix knob ways, and then kind of giving people a good idea of like how to get creative with it.
Yeah, that's the one thing I loved. I saw in the chat multiple people were like, "Man, I got ideas. I can't wait to get back to, and I want to go mix. I want to go mix." Like that's our ultimate goal. Like if you leave these streams excited to go work and do whatever you're gonna do, like that's killer. That makes me feel good. Gives me goosebumps. That like us, our examples are able to get people inspired. So that's super cool.
Yeah, and of course, guys, if you are getting inspired, if you're making music, we'd love to hear it. Hit us up live at uaudio.com. We love featuring music in the opening countdents.
Even when they're 9 minutes long.
Even when they're 9 minutes long. Even when it's a 9-minute epic. Like I'm down for that journey in the morning.
Yep. This is not top 40 radio. We'll play the 9-minute deep cuts. So.
Exactly. Hashtag UA office hours to get into the Studio Showdown. And if throughout the week, we're always available on social media. We got the UAD forums. Plenty of ways to get in contact. We love hearing from you guys. And if you guys have got ideas for future shows, which we're constantly kind of keeping tally of what you guys are putting in the comments and want to see, we'll keep on coming up with cool content for you guys. And we've got some exciting announcements coming in the next couple of weeks. I can't say much more about them at the moment, but just know we're a couple of weeks away from some cool stuff. And if you haven't already, make sure you guys check out those Volt videos from Warren Hewitt, from Sanjay C, Vintage King. Love to hear you guys' feedback on what you're thinking about the Volts. And with that, I think we'll call this a wrap. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys back here next Monday. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
We should make a record.
Totally.